The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
Niran never believed in ghosts. He had lived in Bangkok all his life, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and the constant noise of the city. The supernatural was just an old-fashioned belief to him, something the elderly spoke about in whispers. That was until the night he visited Wat Khao Pha. It started as a simple dare. His friends, a group of university students, had been talking about the ghost story surrounding the temple. They claimed that a spirit of a royal dancer haunted the grounds, forever mourning her lost love. Some said they had seen her dancing under the moonlight, while others heard the eerie sound of a sawdwanga, traditional Thai fiddle playing in the dead of night. "Come on, Niran," his friend T grinned. "If you're so sure ghosts aren't real, let's go prove it." So, against his better judgment, Niran found himself standing in front of Wat Khao Pha at midnight. The temple was ancient, its white walls stained with age. The grand Ubeset ordination hall stood at the heart of the temple, its golden roof glistening faintly under the dim streetlights. The air was thick, humid, and unnervingly still. "All right, let's get this over with," Niran muttered, stepping past the temple gates. The moment he crossed the threshold, a strange chill ran down his spine. The air suddenly felt heavier, pressing against his skin like an unseen force. Then came the sound, a soft, delicate plucking of strings. Niran froze. His friends, who had been joking moments before, also stopped dead in their tracks. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, slow, melancholic, and painfully sad. "Where is that coming from?" T whispered. Niran's eyes darted to the Ubeset. The doors, which had been closed just moments ago, were now slightly ajar. A dim glow flickered from inside. Then she appeared. A woman in an elaborate golden Thai costume stepped into the moonlight. Her dress shimmered as she moved, the delicate silk flowing like water. Her hands twisted gracefully, fingers bending in elegant gestures. But something was wrong. Her movements were too slow, almost unnatural. Her feet barely touched the ground, as if she were floating. Niran's breath hitched. The legends, they were true. The woman continued to dance, but her face remained tilted downward, hidden beneath the ornate golden headdress. Then she stopped. The music ceased. The silence was suffocating. Slowly, painfully slowly, the woman lifted her head. Niran's stomach dropped. Her eyes were hollow. Black, empty voids stared back at him. Her lips curled into a grotesque, unnatural smile, one that stretched far too wide for any human face. Then, with an inhuman snap, her neck twisted at an impossible angle. She lunged, ... A piercing shriek ripped through the air. The sound of crab wooden hand clappers echoed violently around them, like bones snapping in rapid succession. The temple lights flickered, casting her twisted figure in brief, horrifying flashes. "Run!" T screamed. They didn't need to be told twice. Niran sprinted, his heart pounding like a war drum. The sound of clapping crab followed him, growing louder, faster, as if something was chasing them. He didn't dare look back. The temple gates were just ahead. If they could make it outside, then, suddenly, Niran stumbled forward, gasping for air. He turned around, his body trembling. The temple stood quiet and undisturbed. The Ubeset doors were closed once again. There was no sign of the woman, no music, no movement. But as Naran wiped the sweat from his brow, he noticed something on the ground. A single golden hairpin, glistening under the temple lights. And then, ever so faintly, a whisper carried through the wind. The night air in Phetchaburi was thick with humidity as Alex adjusted the straps of his backpack. He had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but nothing intrigued him more than the story of the smiling dancer of the abandoned palace. Locals spoke in hushed voices about the cursed performer, once renowned. Court dancer who had been wrongfully accused of betrayal and executed in disgrace. It was said that her spirit still haunted the palace ruins, dancing under the moonlight, waiting for someone to witness her final performance. Most people feared her. Alex, he wanted to see her for himself. That was why, at exactly midnight, he stood in front of the forgotten gates of the royal palace, his camera slung round his neck. The palace was a forgotten relic of the past. Its grand entrance, once adorned with golden embellishments, now stood in eerie silence, overgrown with vines and decayed by time. The faded murals of celestial dancers still clung to the peeling walls, their painted eyes watching him as he stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It was as if the world had grown to quiet now, chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just an endless, suffocating silence. Then, a sound, a soft hum, distant yet unmistakable. Alex felt a chill crawl down his spine. His fingers tightened around the camera as he moved deeper into the ruins, his footsteps echoing through the abandoned halls. Then, as he turned the corner into what had once been the grand ballroom, he froze. Under the silver glow of the moon, a woman stood perfectly still. She was dressed in an elaborate traditional Thai costume, her golden headdress gleaming under the dim light. Her hands were poised in a delicate gesture, as if caught mid-dance, but she wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing. Alex swallowed hard. He lifted his camera, adjusting the focus, but the moment he pressed record, the dancer moved. Her arms lifted with unnatural grace, her fingers bending in precise, delicate motions. Her feet never made a sound against the cracked floor. The hum grew into a melodia Thai classical song, slow and haunting. Then, beneath the music, came the clap of crab, once, twice, thrice. Alex's pulse quickened. She danced alone. Her movements were hypnotic, sorrowful, like a soul trapped in an endless waltz. Then she stopped. The music abruptly cut off. The crab fell silent. Slowly, the dancer turned toward him. Alex's breath caught in his throat. She was smiling, but it wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, too unnatural, stretching beyond the limits of her face. Then she took a step forward. The crab clapped again, faster, louder, closer. Alex wanted to run, but something told him it was already too late. Alex's breath came in short gasps. His feet refused to move, as if the very ground beneath him had trapped him in place. The dancer stood only a few meters away now, her too wide smile stretching impossibly across her face. The golden ornaments on her headdress glinted under the pale moonlight, swaying gently as if caught in an unseen breeze. The crab clapped again, once, twice, thrice. Then she danced again. Her arms moved in intricate gestures, her body gliding effortlessly across the cracked floor. But this time, her movements felt wrong. Too fast, too aggressive, too inhuman. Alex's fingers trembled as he gripped his camera, its red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. Then, the dancer stopped, and in the eerie silence that followed, Alex heard a new sound, a faint giggling. But it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from all around him. His breath hitched. His eyes darted to the darkened corners of the ballroom, where the faded murals of dancers were painted on the ancient walls. But now they were moving, their painted faces twisted into grotesque grins, their painted hands clapping silently, their painted bodies swaying to an unseen rhythm. The entire room was alive. Alex took a shaky step backward. The dancer snapped her head toward him. Then she lunged. Her body did not run. She simply glided forward, her feet never touching the ground. The crab clapped frantically, echoing in his skull. He ran. Alex bolted down the darkened hallways, his camera swinging wildly against his chest. The once silent palace was now alive with sound, the whisper of silk fabric brushing against stone, the rhythmic clap of the crab keeping time with his pounding heartbeat, and the soft, breathless giggles of something unseen. The exit, he just needed to reach the exit. His lungs burned as he turned a sharp corner and stopped cold. The dancer was there, waiting for him, standing between him and the exit. Her body was unnaturally still, but her smile had grown wider. Her hands lifted, inviting him to join the dance. Alex's legs felt weak. Then, in the darkness behind her, more figures began to emerge. Women in tattered Thai costumes, their faces frozen in grotesque smiles, their movements jerky and broken, as if they had been forced to dance for centuries. They raised their arms in perfect unison. The crab clapped one last time, and then the dancer stepped toward him. Alex opened his mouth to scream. Everything went black. Alex's world was dark. The echoes of clapping crabs still rang in his ears, but his body felt heavy, as if he was sinking into something deep and endless. Then a voice. "You took my place." Alex's eyes snapped open. He was no longer in the ruined halls of the palace. He was standing in a grand ballroom, its golden chandeliers flickering with candlelight. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and incense, and the polished wooden floor stretched endlessly beneath him. But the worst part, he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were figures dressed in traditional Thai costumes, their faces twisted into wide, unnatural smiles. Their bodies twitched as if struggling to keep moving, but their arms and legs followed a strict, impossible rhythm. And in the center of them all, the dancer, her golden headdress shone like fire, her long fingers bending in delicate, intricate gestures. She raised her hand, beckoning him, and suddenly Alex's body moved. Against his will, his arms lifted, mimicking her gestures. His feet glided across the floor, following an unseen rhythm. He was dancing. The crab clapped again, faster, louder, ... His body twirled and swayed, his movements flawless as if he had been trained for this his entire life. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. His muscles burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he had no control. The crowd of dancers around him moved in perfect unison, their smiles never fading, their eyes vacant and lifeless. Alex's mind screamed. Then the dancer stepped closer. Her smile was now too wide, her eyes empty voids of darkness. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his chest. And in that moment, Alex understood. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a curse, a punishment. All the dancers around him, they had been here before him. They had tried to leave, and they had failed, just as he would. The music swelled, the crab clapped violently, and Alex's feet kept moving, faster, 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 until everything stopped. The music, the clapping, the movement, and Alex. Alex smiled. His lips curled too wide, stretching beyond the limits of his face. His eyes dimmed, his body froze in place, locked forever in a perfect dance pose. And deep in the abandoned palace, a new legend was born. For those who entered at midnight would hear the soft clap of the crab, would see the shadow of a foreign man dancing among the cursed performers, and if they watched for too long, they would see him slowly turn to smile at them. The dance never ends, and now neither does he. Jira never believed in ghosts. She had always thought supernatural stories were nothing but exaggerations told to scare children. But that night, she learned the truth in the most horrifying way. It all started when her friend, Ploy, invited her to an abandoned temple in Ayutthaya. Ploy was a thrill seeker, obsessed with ghost hunting and urban legends. She had read online about a haunted shrine where people reported seeing a mysterious woman dancing alone under the moonlight. They said she was a cursed spirit, doomed to perform for eternity. "This is just another dumb story," Jira scoffed as they arrived at the temple. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of old wood and incense lingered in the wind. The place was eerily silent, except for the occasional rustling of leaves. The main shrine stood in the middle of the courtyard, its wooden pillars cracked and covered in vines. "Come on, just one video," Ploy urged. "If we catch something, it'll go viral." Reluctantly, Jira agreed. They set up their phones and started recording. Nothing happened at first, just the dim glow of their flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then they heard it. A faint sound, the delicate clinking of crab, the wooden hand clappers used in traditional Thai dance. It came from nowhere, echoing through the air. Jira's body froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ploy nodded, her face pale. "It's probably just the wind, or an animal." But then came the sound of footsteps, soft, rhythmic, and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of someone walking barefoot on stone. And then they saw her. A woman in a golden silk dress stepped into the moonlight. Her movements were slow and graceful, her hands bending in perfect, elegant gestures. Her head tilted slightly, but her face was hidden behind the long strands of her black hair. Jira couldn't breathe. Something about her presence felt wrong. The woman's dance continued, her feet gliding across the ground effortlessly. But the closer she came, the heavier the air felt. The temperature dropped. Ploy grabbed Jira's arm, her grip trembling. "We need to go," Ploy muttered. Jira turned to run, but then the woman stopped dancing. The silence was suffocating. Slowly, painfully slowly, the woman lifted her head. Her face was not human. Her eyes were hollow, black pits. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, a grin too big for any human face. And then she screamed. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched wail mixed with the sharp snap of breaking bones. The torches in the shrine burst into flame, illuminating the woman's grotesque form. Her body twisted unnaturally, her limbs bending in impossible angles. Jira and Ploy ran. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, the sound of clapping crab chasing them, growing louder and louder. As they reached the entrance of the temple, Jira dared to look back. The woman was right behind them. Her arms reached out, her fingers long and claw-like. Her hollow eyes locked onto Jira's, and for a moment she felt something pull her in. Then suddenly silence. The sound stopped. The air felt normal again. They were outside the temple grounds. The woman was gone. Jira collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Ploy was crying, her body shaking violently. They never spoke about that night again. But sometimes, when Jira was alone in her apartment, she would hear it, The soft, rhythmic tapping of bare feet, the delicate clink of crab, and the whisper of a song from a voice that was no longer human. The air in Ayutthaya was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Daniel adjusted his camera strap. He had been in Thailand for nearly 3 months, traveling from province to province, documenting old temples and forgotten ruins. But nothing had piqued his curiosity quite like the story of Wat Ratchanikonan, abandoned temple lost to time. It wasn't just the crumbling architecture or the eerie silence that drew him in. It was the legend. Locals spoke of a ghostly dancer, a woman who had once been the star of a royal performance, but had died tragically mid-dance. They said she never left. Some swore they had seen her twirling under the moonlight. Others claimed to hear the rhythmic clap of crab-wooden hand, clappers echoing from the temple grounds. Most people avoided the place, but Daniel, he was drawn to it. And that was how he found himself standing at the temple entrance just before sunset, his heart pounding in his chest. The temple was in ruins. Towering stone pillars, now covered in creeping vines, framed the main courtyard. A faded shrine sat in the center, half collapsed, with offerings of wilted flowers and melted candles left behind by those who still feared the spirit. The silence was unsettling. Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to shake off the unease. He was here to film, to capture the beauty of decay, not to chase ghost stories. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the old brick path. The sky darkened above him, the last rays of sunlight bleeding into twilight. Then a sound, a soft hum, distant yet clear. It was a melody, a tune so delicate it barely brushed against his ears. Daniel froze. The temple had been completely silent just moments ago. Slowly, he lifted his camera and pressed record. The melody grew louder. It was a Thai classical song, slow and mournful, like an unseen orchestra playing for an audience long gone. Then, beneath the melody, came another sound. Click, clap, click, clap. The unmistakable rhythm of crab sharp and deliberate, like unseen hands controlling the tempo of a dance. Daniel's breath hitched. He turned toward the courtyard. There, beneath the flickering light of the rising moon, a figure stood. She was draped in gold and red, her traditional Thai costume shimmering against the ruins' darkness. Her hands moved in fluid, elegant gestures, each motion perfectly timed to the unseen music. She danced alone. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He lifted his camera, focusing the lens on the woman, and then she stopped. The music ceased instantly. The crab fell silent. The woman turned toward him. Daniel's fingers trembled over the camera's buttons. Something was wrong. Her face had no eyes. Only smooth, hollow sockets stared back at him. Then she took a step forward. The sound of the crab returned, faster, louder, more frenzied. Daniel couldn't breathe. He had come looking for a story, but now the story had found him. Daniel's breath came in short, ragged gasps. His hands trembled as he tried to steady the camera, but his body refused to obey. The eyeless dancer stood motionless beneath the moonlight, her body poised in an unfinished movement. The golden silk of her costume shimmered as if it were still caught mid-spin. Then she moved. Her arms lifted with unnatural grace, fingers bending into intricate gestures. Her feet, though hidden beneath the folds of her dress, never seemed to touch the ground. Daniel's mind screamed at him to run, but his legs were frozen in place. The crab clapped again. Once, twice, thrice. Each beat sent a cold shiver down his spine. Then the whispering started. At first, it was faint, just a breath against the wind. But as the dancer glided toward him, the whispers grew louder, surrounding him, pressing against his ears. "Why do you watch?" Daniel swallowed hard. His instincts screamed for him to flee, but the filmmaker in him was mesmerized. Through the camera's viewfinder, she was hauntingly beautiful. Her every motion was precise, hypnotic, yet filled with a sorrow so deep it clawed at his chest. Then her head snapped toward him. The whispers ceased. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the music resumed. But this time, it was different. It was wrong. The once elegant melody had become distorted, warped, as if played by unseen hands that had forgotten how music was supposed to sound. The crab clapped wildly, erratic and desperate. And then the dancer rushed toward him. Daniel's body finally obeyed. He turned and ran. His footsteps pounded against the ancient stones as the ruined temple twisted around him. The shadows moved, elongated figures stretching unnaturally in the moonlight. The whispers returned, now screaming in his ears. "Stay, watch me, join the dance." The crab clapped faster. The sound was everywhere, above, behind, beneath. Daniel reached the entrance, his fingers grazing the moss-covered gate. And then everything stopped. The music, the whispers, the crab. He turned back, gasping for air. The temple was empty. The dancer was gone. The only sign she had ever been there was the faint scent of jasmine and old incense lingering in the air. Then Daniel noticed something at his feet. A single golden hairpin glinting under the moonlight. His fingers itched to pick it up, but deep inside, something warned him not to. The night was silent once more, but Daniel knew the dance was not over. Not yet. Daniel staggered backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The golden hairpin at his feet gleamed in the moonlight, as if waiting for him to pick it up. His mind screamed, "Don't touch it." But his body, his hands moved on their own. His fingers curled around the delicate metal. The moment he lifted it, the temple shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of jasmine and old incense. The ruins around him seemed less broken, the walls no longer covered in vines. The cracks in the stone floor sealed themselves, and the faded murals of dancers along the walls became vivid and new. Daniel blinked. He was no longer standing in an abandoned temple. He was inside a grand performance hall. Golden lanterns hung from above, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floor. The once crumbled pillars were restored, standing tall and proud. Silken banners swayed gently with the breeze, and in front of him, a crowd of shadowy figures sat in perfect rows, their faces featureless, their bodies motionless. Then the crab clapped. Once, twice, thrice. The dancer was there again. She stood in the center of the stage, her golden and red costume shimmering under the lanterns. The melody of a Thai sword-dwang fiddle played softly in the background, the notes sad and haunting. But something was wrong. This time, she did not dance alone. To Daniel's horror, his own body began to move. His arms lifted, his fingers bending in the same intricate gestures as hers. His feet, though unwilling, stepped forward, mirroring her movements. He was dancing with her. His breath quickened. His mind screamed for him to stop, to fight, but his body was no longer his own. The crab clapped faster, the melody swelling into a fevered pitch. The shadowed audience leaned forward, as if eager for the final act. The dancer slowly turned toward him, and for the first time, she spoke. "You took my offering. Now, you must finish my dance." Her voice was soft, filled with an endless sorrow. Then, she removed her golden mask. Daniel's blood ran cold. There was nothing behind it, just a gaping void where her face should be. The crab clapped violently. The audience began to murmur, their whispers growing louder, faster, overlapping into a deafening cacophony. Daniel's vision blurred. The world spun around him. He couldn't breathe. Then, blackness. Daniel woke up to the first light of dawn. He was lying on the cold stone floor of the abandoned temple. His camera lay beside him, its battery dead. His fingers trembled as he reached into his pocket and found the golden hairpin. His chest tightened. The temple was silent now, the night's horrors gone without a trace. But the faint scent of jasmine still lingered in the air, and in the distance, barely audible, the soft, mournful hum of a song. The dance was not over, and deep inside, Daniel knew it never would be. Ben had always loved exploring abandoned places. There was something thrilling about stepping into a forgotten world, a place where time stood still. His latest expedition brought him to an old village in central Thailand, one that had been abandoned for decades. Locals warned him to stay away. They spoke in hushed tones about a spirit that danced beneath the full moon. A woman who had once been a famed Nang Rama classical Thai dancer. They said she had been murdered in the village long ago, and on certain nights her ghost still performed her final dance. Ben, of course, didn't believe in ghost stories. Armed with his flashlight and camera, he stepped into the village just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was unnervingly still, the silence pressing against his ears. The wooden houses, now overgrown with vines, stood like skeletal remains of the past. As he walked further in, he saw the old shrine at the center of the village. It was small, covered in dust and decay, but strangely untouched by time. That's when he heard it. A haunting melody drifted through the air, delicate, sorrowful, and chillingly beautiful. It sounded like traditional Thai pifit music, played by an unseen orchestra. The sound sent shivers down his spine. Ben swallowed hard and turned toward the shrine. There she was. A woman in a shimmering golden dress stood before the shrine. Her back was turned to him, her hands lifted in a poised, elegant gesture. Her movements were slow, methodical, each step flowing into the next with unnatural grace. Ben's breath hitched. The villagers had been right. This wasn't just an old legend. She was real. Something inside him screamed for him to run, but his feet remained frozen. He couldn't look away. It was as if the dance was pulling him in. Then, without warning, the music stopped. The silence was deafening. Slowly, the woman turned her head, not her body, just her head. It twisted at an impossible angle, revealing her face. Ben's stomach churned. Her eyes were hollow, black pits. Her mouth stretched into a ghastly grin, too wide, too unnatural. The golden makeup on her face cracked and peeled like old paint, revealing grey, rotting flesh underneath. Then she moved. With a sickening snap, her body twisted unnaturally, her limbs bending at grotesque angles. She lunged toward him, her fingers clawing through the air. He didn't dare look back. He ran until he reached the village entrance, nearly collapsing onto the dirt road. When he finally mustered the courage to glance behind him, the music had stopped. The village was silent once more. The shrine stood empty. The woman was gone. But as Ben turned to leave, he caught something in the corner of his Ajar golden sash, fluttering in the wind. And then, ever so faintly, the whisper of a voice. "Shall we dance again?" Lena had always been skeptical about ghosts. She loved traveling, exploring old places, and hearing local legends, but she never truly believed in them. That changed on her trip to Chiang Mai. She had been backpacking across Thailand when she met a local photographer, preacher, who was obsessed with capturing eerie and abandoned places. One evening, as they sat in a small cafe, he leaned in with a mischievous grin. "Have you heard of the abandoned theater outside the city?" he asked. Lena shook her head. Preacher's voice dropped to a whisper. "It used to be home to the most famous Lakan troupe in Chiang Mai. Decades ago, their lead dancer, a beautiful woman named Nang Mayura, fell in love with a young musician. But he betrayed her, choosing to marry another woman. Heartbroken and humiliated, she killed herself right in the middle of the grand stage." Lena shuddered. "They say," Preacher continued, "before she died, she cursed the entire troupe. And soon after, everything collapsed. Performances failed, accidents happened, and eventually, the place was abandoned." Lena chuckled nervously. "So what? You want to go there?" His eyes gleamed. "I want to capture proof, and I think you should come with me." Later that night, against her better judgment, Lena found herself standing before the abandoned theater. The building loomed in the darkness, its wooden structure barely holding together. The faded banner above the entrance still bore the name of the once glorious troupe. A gust of wind howled through the broken windows, making the whole place feel alive. "This is a bad idea," she muttered. Preacher ignored her, already setting up his camera. "Come on, just a few shots." They stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The main hall was eerily silent, the wooden stage at the far end bathed in faint moonlight. Rows of tattered seats faced the stage, as if waiting for a performance that would never come. A woman stood in the center of the stage, draped in a golden Thai dancer's costume. Her fingers curved in elegant gestures, her movements slow and hauntingly perfect. But something was wrong. She had no feet. She floated just above the ground, her shadow stretching unnaturally behind her. Preacher gasped, fumbling for his camera. But the moment he lifted it, the woman turned to face them. Her eyes were black voids, her lips curled into a smile too wide, too unnatural. And then she screamed. The sound ripped through the theater, a shrill wail filled with grief and rage. The wooden planks beneath them trembled. The walls creaked and groaned, as if the entire building were alive, reacting to her fury. Lena's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Then the dancer lunged. Her body twisted at an impossible angle, her arms outstretched like talons. The scent of rotting flowers and old perfume filled the air as she rushed toward them. Preacher screamed, grabbing Lena's wrist. "Run!" They bolted toward the entrance, the sound of clapping crab wooden hand clappers chasing them, growing louder and faster. The walls shook violently, dust and debris raining down. As they neared the exit, Lena risked one last glance back. The woman stood just inside the doorway, watching them. The music had stopped. The silence was suffocating. But then, in a voice soft as the wind, she whispered, "You will come back, won't you?"